So on that basis, I'm delighted to welcome our panel, and I'm going to ask our very own speaker, Tim Scott, who's treasurer of the Freedom Association, and will ask me to say that if you want to make a contribution, do please go to, or join us, go to tfa.net, and please, because that helps to fund these kind of events. But Tim is also captain. Tim Scott, he was in Cyprus and Northern Ireland with the Queen's Fusiliers, and he's got a few ideas from the Freedom Association point of view just to set the scene before we ask our main speakers to speak. So Tim, would you like to go ahead?
David, thank you very much, and just give me a wave if you can hear me, so that should be good. Thank you, and thank you for having me on, and great to be on the panel with Julian Lewis and Colonel Richard. David, what was it Nick Clegg said about an EU army? A dangerous fantasy, I seem to remember he called it. Perhaps he can pontificate that from his vice presidential position with Facebook in California. But I did, those of you who are members, and I'm sure as treasurer you'll allow me a plug for the finances, may have seen Free Nation, which you either get posted or emailed to you. And I did have an article, such as it was, in Free Nation. So do visit that. You can get it online if you don't get it posted to you and you are a member. If you aren't a member, do join us, of course. And I think it's ever more relevant because we live in an ever more uncertain and multipolar world. And one of the principles, one of the founding principles, in fact, of the Freedom Association is strong national defence. And that's a great principle. And by that we mean defences that can provide the security that we need, that are independently deployable, and that are not dependent upon any other country. And I was trying to say with what I wrote that our armed forces, like Britain herself, are forces for good in the world. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But also that just to point out that national security and defence are the first duty of any government, and I think this government gets that. Although I'm not entirely sure about previous governments, but I think the main thing is I think this government very definitely gets that. And it's not just about providing defence and security. It's interesting to note who does the government turn to in times of trouble. Rather apart from times of war and conflict. And the armed forces provide both the regulars and the reserves. I did a bit in both, that they provide the army, they provide the government with a source of emergency manpower. So you may remember the foot and mouth outbreak from back in the day. You may remember when we didn't have enough guards for the Olympics in 2012, various floods and dams about to burst. And of course, now with vaccine distribution and logistics, who does the army get asked by? Who do the politicians and the government turn to? It's of course the armed forces are there as a ready-made reserve, and they can deliver. They do deliver in times of trouble. Tony Blair always used to say that when he asked the forces to do something, he always got a good positive result, whereas if he asked other people, he get a list of excuses why it couldn't be done. So, but of course, it all has to be paid for, and there is the 2%, 3% of GDP debate about how we fund it. One of the things Trump did get right, he didn't get everything right, of course. One of the things Trump did get right was calling out the NATO freeloaders, those not spending the minimum 2%. Germany's probably the worst offender. Biggest economy in Europe, and it's only spending about 1.3. And they had the nerve to complain to America about withdrawing their troops from Germany. Well, how about getting some of your own troops? But this government, and I'll let Julian Lewis talk more about the very welcome increase in funding that the government have just announced. It's really great to hear that. So this fits into the Army's footprint, and particularly, I think, the Navy, which is, I think, the most relevant service to global Britain. It really fits into the whole global Britain agenda and British influence around the world. And like I know David is, I'm a huge fan of CANZA, the Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK potential alliance, which would have wouldn't just be a great defence and security partnership. It would have 7% of the world's economy and would be a great advocate for human rights, democracy, free trade. But it would be a great defence combination as well. And there are others that we can work with around the globe as well, not just the USA and NATO, of course, but I think Kenya and Nigeria are two big African countries we've identified. We've got a permanent training facility in Kenya and a training team in Nigeria. I don't know if people caught it, but just before we came on, we were talking about the British troops that we've got in Mali. And I think also we should be working with some of the Sunni Muslim majority countries. Historically, we've had great links historically with Jordan. Let's not forget Israel, of course, the West's most steadfast ally in the Middle East. So these are all people that we can be working with. This is all good stuff, and that we can do. Now the numbers are much reduced, of course, and but that's not entirely unwarranted. But it is partly unwarranted. I think we've got we no longer need 10,000 troops in Northern Ireland, 20,000 troops in West Germany. But if you look at our footprint of bases, we've got a very good footprint of bases. Cyprus is probably the best example, 3,000 troops there, 2 infantry battalions, a really good airfield at RAF Akrotiri, and others. We've got troops in Mali, still got a garrison in the Falklands, Gibraltar. Many of these are legacies of empire, of course. And we've got a relatively new base in the Middle East, HMS Jufair on Bahrain, with the Navy trying out something a little bit new, a little bit different, with ships based out there and the crew rotated through every 4 months by just flying out by plane, and the ship stays there. That seems to be working. There's just a couple of other things I'd like to really just point out. One is the great work done by Johnny Mercer, and I'm very grateful to the government for taking up this issue of prosecution of our troops, some might say persecution of our troops, dating back to the days of Ballymurphy in Northern Ireland, but Iraq and Afghanistan too. And this really has got to stop. And the example I always use is the South Armagh sniper gang, who under the Good Friday Agreement only served 18 months for at least a dozen killings. And I think just the last thing to comment on really is the very welcome COVID and lockdowns allowing, the very welcome deployment of the new carrier Queen Elizabeth II, which will go through the Gulf, round to Japan and back. That's due in May, with a couple of frigates, a couple of destroyers, and some supply ships, and almost certainly a submarine. So that's getting some global Britain back on the agenda. So yeah, I'm proud of our armed forces. I have an almost boyish enthusiasm for all things defence and security. So that's really what I wanted to say. I think post-Brexit, there's very exciting opportunities for our country. I've just before I came on, somebody posted on Twitter, Hugh Grant telling us that Brexit was a catastrophe and the country's finished. Well, I say we're only just getting started, and our armed forces are very much part of that. So thank you, David. That's I'm sure we'll have questions later, but I'll let the others have a go now. Thank you.